And this is a famous fight scene that you had with Bruce Lee.
I still consider it a classic.
It holds up. I watched it today, and you know they've advanced fight scenes so much, but this really holds up. It's an amazing fight scene.
Well, I think the main reason Bruce was really ahead of his time.
Chuck Norris died on March 19, 2026.
Breaking news in the United States, where legendary action star and martial artist Chuck Norris has died.
And in the days since, people have been going back through everything he ever said about Bruce Lee.
And when Bruce and I met, Bruce and I started working out together. And my style of fighting was, more Korean, a lot of high kicks, spinning kicks, so forth. Where Bruce's was more of in close type fighting and low kicks. But Bruce was a very open-minded type of a guy.
Because Norris was the last person standing who had access to parts of that story nobody else could tell. He trained with Lee. He filmed with Leah. He had lunch with Lee 4 days before Lee dropped dead. And over the course of his life, in interviews, in columns, and in a secretly recorded dinner conversation, he revealed things about Bruce Lee that most people have never heard. This is all of it, put together in one place. The two men first met in 1968 at the All-American Karate Championships at Madison Square Garden, where Norris had just won the world title. Lee was there to give a demonstration, watched Norris compete, and approached him afterward. They ended up back at the same hotel, got into conversation, and never stopped. They talked through the lobby, talked in the elevator, and when they reached Leah's floor, neither of them wanted to stop, so they kept going in the hallway outside his room. They were still there working out and exchanging techniques at 7 in the morning. That first night set the tone for everything that followed, because what both men discovered was that they genuinely disagreed with each other and found that disagreement more interesting than agreement. The disagreement was about kicking. Lee's philosophy at the time was absolute. You never kick above the waist. It made you vulnerable. It sacrificed balance. It was a strategic mistake. Norris thought the opposite, that you kick wherever the opponent leaves themselves open, and that high kicks were not only effective, but decisive when executed correctly. He demonstrated. He showed Lee his roundhouse, his high kick technique, the mechanics behind it. Lee watched and, according to Norris, was genuinely moved by what he saw. He said it was exactly what he had been looking for. From that night forward, Lee began incorporating high kicks into his arsenal, the same kicks that would define his screen presence for the rest of his career. The next time you watch any Bruce Lee film and see him launch a kick above the waist, you are watching something Chuck Norris taught him in a hotel hallway in New York at 2 in the morning. For the next 2 years, the two men met regularly at Leah's home in Los Angeles and trained together in his backyard. 3 hours at a time, working through attacking techniques where one would attack and the other would defend, then switch. Norris described Leah's physical presence in those sessions the way everyone who ever trained with Lee described it, as something that did not seem to belong to an ordinary person. The speed specifically. Lee could close distance before you registered that he had moved. Norris, the world karate champion, found himself consistently humbled and consistently fascinated, and said openly that being able to train alongside Lee was one of the great honors of his life. Then, in 1972, Lee called Norris and offered him a role in a film he was writing, directing, and starring in. The film was The Way of the Dragon, and Lee wanted Norris to play Colt, the villain who would face him in the climactic fight at the Colosseum in Rome.
And I worked out with Bruce Lee, and I worked out for 3 years. That's when I held the world title. And then he went to Hong Kong to pursue his movie career, did a couple of movies, very successful. So he called me up and said, I want to do a movie with a fight scene that everyone will remember called Return of the Dragon. He said, would you come over and do the fight scene with me? I said, well, do I have to lose? He says, yeah, you have to lose. So I said, all right. So I went over there, and I'd seen his first 2 movies. I said, the guys you fight don't even have a chance. I mean, they don't even touch you, you know? And he said, no, we'll make this a seesaw battle.
Norris asked one question: who wins? Lee's answer was immediate. He said he didn't want to beat the world champion. He wanted to kill the world champion. Norris accepted. The fight they filmed over 5 days in Rome became one of the most iconic sequences in the history of martial arts cinema, and it was almost entirely improvised, built from years of genuine mutual knowledge. They knew each other's tendencies, each other's timing, each other's range, and they built the scene out of that. When Lee's character finally defeats Norris's, Lee drapes his opponent's karate uniform over him and places his belt across his chest. A gesture of respect, Norris said, moved him when he saw it. That scene also contained something that was kept quiet for decades. In one moment during the fight, Norris throws Leah to the ground, and Leah grabs the hair on Norris's chest and pulls it out. Norris held onto that story for years before he started telling it publicly, and when he did, he described getting a letter from a fan who said he and his son had watched the film 26 times and wanted to know if it was real. It was. A few months after the film wrapped, Lee called Norris again, this time not about a movie. He was coming to Los Angeles to see a doctor. He had been passing out unexpectedly on set in Hong Kong, getting dizzy, and no one could explain why. They met for lunch in Chinatown at Lee's favorite restaurant. Norris described him that day as completely himself, full of energy, laughing, talking fast about his plans. Lee told him the doctor that morning had given him a clean bill of health and said he had the insides of an 18-year-old boy. He told Norris about the blank checks he was being offered for his next film, that he could name his own number, that everything was finally breaking the way he had spent his whole life working toward. He seemed, by Norris's account, to be at the exact peak of his life. 4 days later, on July 20th, 1973, Norris heard on the radio that Bruce Lee was dead. He was 32 years old. Norris was a pallbearer at the funeral in Seattle. When Lee's widow Linda moved back to California afterward, she found a house half a block from Norris's. He spent time with their son Brandon, who was a small child, telling him stories about his father. Brandon Lee would grow up to become a star himself before his own death on a film set in 1993 at 38 years old. The curse the tabloids invented around the Lee family after that was something Norris never entertained, but the grief clearly never left him. On the subject of Lee's death, Norris spoke publicly multiple times over the years, and his account was consistent. He believed Lee died from a drug interaction, that a painkiller given to Lee for a headache on the night of his death reacted with other medication he was taking for a back injury and caused his brain to swell. That explanation is consistent with the official finding of cerebral edema, though researchers have argued over the precise mechanism ever since. The official verdict was death by misadventure. The conspiracy theories ranged from ancient assassination techniques to deliberate poisoning by people Lee had offended in Hong Kong.
What's the craziest of those? I mean, certainly reports that he'd been killed by secret Chinese gangs that...
I really, honestly,
you
don't
name
keep up with them.
But you name it, it's been said about him, hasn't it?
Norris never engaged with any of them. His position was simple. Lee's body gave him warning signs that nobody took seriously. The passing out on set, the dizzy spells, and by the time anyone understood what was happening, it was too late. The question that followed Norris for the rest of his life, the one he was asked in every interview, at every public appearance, in every conversation where Bruce Lee came up, was the same question: who would win in a real fight? For most of his career, Norris deflected it with a line he attributed to Lee himself, that showing off is the fool's idea of glory. But in a dinner conversation that was secretly recorded and later became widely known, someone asked him directly and would not let him dodge it. His answer was immediate and unequivocal: Bruce Lee. No hesitation. He said Lee was simply the best he had ever encountered, and that there was no version of that fight where the outcome was in question. Chuck Norris was 86 years old when he died, and by his own account he had been working out just days before, in Hawaii, on his birthday. He had spent nearly 6 decades being asked about one person more than any other, and he never tired of it because the friendship was, by every indication he ever gave, one of the most genuine of his life. What he left behind on the subject of Bruce Lee is not a collection of shocking revelations in the tabloid sense. It is something more valuable than that. It is a first-hand account of who Bruce Lee actually was, told by someone who trained with him, argued with him, filmed with him, shared a meal with him 4 days before he died, and carried his coffin. There is no other source like it, and now that source is gone, what remains is the footage. The hallway conversation that turned into a morning workout, the 5 days at the Coliseum, the lunch in Chinatown, the things Lee taught Norris and the things Norris taught Lee, including those high kicks that ended up in every film Lee ever made afterward. The story of those two men, told completely only by one of them, is now finished, but the film they made together will run as long as anyone is still watching.